cleaner's daughter asked Mafia boss to walk her to school so she felt safe. What he did shocked everyone. The October air hung heavy over the city when she appeared, backpack straps cutting into small shoulders, school uniform pressed, but faded from too many washes. She stood at the edge of the courtyard where polished cars gleamed and men in expensive suits spoke in hushed tones. A child who'd been taught her entire life to be invisible. Approaching the one man everyone else knew to fear. His silver hair caught the morning light. Scars on his knuckles told stories mothers used to warn their children to sleep. The kind of man whose name made prosecutors hesitate, whose presence made entire rooms recalibrate their breathing. No one interrupted him when he was working. Ever. But she did. Her mother, the woman who scrubbed his floors until they reflected like mirrors, who cleaned blood from marble when things went wrong, who'd taught her daughter that survival meant silence, rushed forward in panic. Mia, no. I'm so sorry, Mr. Volkov. She didn't mean. He raised one hand. Everything stopped. Security teams froze mid-step. Drivers abandoned car doors. Even the bodyguards flanking him seemed to forget how to move. Because what happened next violated every rule of their world. The girl's voice was small but steady. Sir, there's a man following me to school. Every morning for 2 weeks. Mama called the police, but they said... Her words caught. They said people like us don't get protection. Across the street, a dark van idled. Windows tinted. Engine running. Waiting. And inside it, someone watched. What this mafia boss did next would ignite a war, shatter a criminal empire, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous man alive is exactly who innocence needs most. Stay with me, because the truth behind this little girl's courage will leave you speechless. But before we begin, I want to beg you for something. I want to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I cannot do it without you do me a favor by hitting the subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, let's dive in.
Her name was Sandra Reyes, 8 years old, and she'd been learning the rules of invisibility since before she could read. Never make eye contact with Mr. Volkov or his associates. Never speak unless spoken to, and even then, keep answers short. Never, ever ask the powerful for anything. These weren't suggestions. They were survival. Her mother, Sophia, had worked as a cleaner in the Volkov estate for 3 years. 12-hour shifts maintaining a world they'd never truly belonged to. They lived in the converted staff quarters behind the main residence, where marble gave way to linoleum and crystal chandeliers became bare bulbs. A clear line separated their reality from his. Sophia had drilled these lessons into her daughter with the fierce urgency of someone who understood exactly how fragile their security was. "We're lucky, Mija," she'd whisper while braiding Sandra's curly hair each morning. "Mr. Volkov pays fairly. Doesn't raise his voice at staff. That's rare. So we stay quiet. We stay grateful. We stay invisible." Invisible worked inside the estate walls. But 6 blocks away at Lincoln Elementary, Sandra was anything but. For 3 weeks, she'd felt him watching. The man with the dark van and eyes that never quite smiled even when his mouth did. At first, she thought maybe she was imagining it, the way he appeared at the school gates in the morning, near the corner bodega where she sometimes bought candy, outside the estate entrance when she returned home. Always there. Always watching. Getting closer each day like he was testing how brave she'd be. Then he spoke to her. Just 2 words as she hurried past the van last week. "Hello, Sandra." She'd never told him her name. That night she told her mother everything, voice shaking, tears streaming. Sophia held her tight and promised to make it stop. She went to the police station still wearing her cleaning uniform, filed a report with Officer Martinez. "Has this man touched your daughter, Miss Reyes?" "No, but he knows her name when..." "Children have active imaginations, ma'am. Sometimes they misinterpret friendly adults in the neighborhood." Sophia went back 4 more times. 4 more variations of the same dismissal. The officer's eyes always lingered on her uniform, her work-worn hands, the address she gave, staff quarters, not the main residence. His message was clear without him ever saying it directly. People like you don't get the same protection as people like them. But this morning, when Sandra woke to her mother's fever-rattled cough and saw her struggling just to stand, when she looked out their small window and saw the van parked directly across from the estate gates. Not hiding anymore, just waiting. Something inside her cracked. Some fears were bigger than breaking rules. Some dangers were worth risking everything to escape, even if it meant approaching the one man her mother feared more than any predator on the street. Dmitry Volkov had survived 30 years in a world where hesitation meant death by learning to read people in seconds. He could identify an undercover cop by the way they held their coffee, spot a liar at 50 paces, predict betrayal before the traitor had fully formed the thought. Instinct wasn't a gift. It was the price of staying alive. So when the small girl appeared at his car door, hand reaching for his jacket, he knew 3 things immediately. She was terrified. She had no idea what she was risking. And whatever had driven her to break every social boundary that governed her world was serious enough to kill for. But it was the 4th thing that made his blood run cold. The man across the street leaning against the van. The predatory stillness. The smile that disappeared the moment Sandra approached. Volkov recognized that stance because he'd been studying Viktor Kozlov's organization for 8 months. Ever since they'd started operating at the edges of his territory. Traffickers. Child traffickers specifically, with a network stretching from here to Eastern Europe. Kozlov had approached him twice through intermediaries, proposing partnerships, shared territory, mutual profit. Both times, Volkov had sent the messengers back missing fingers. Some money came with a price too high to pay. And now one of Kozlov's hunters was standing 60 feet from his estate, bold as brass, targeting a child who lived under his roof. The disrespect alone was worth killing for. The implication that Volkov's territory was weak enough, his reputation soft enough that predators could hunt here without consequence, that was worth a war. But it was Sandra's face that made his decision. She looked up at him with eyes that held the same terror he'd seen once before, 32 years ago, reflected in his mother's eyes as she threw herself between him and a rival family's bullets. He'd been 9 years old, small for his age, too innocent to understand why people wanted him dead just because of the name he carried. His mother had taken 3 bullets to the chest. She'd died in his arms on their kitchen floor, blood soaking into the yellow dress she'd worn to his school concert. Her last words whispered through lips already turning blue. Protect the innocent, Dmitri. Promise me. Don't become the monster they think you are. Promise me. He'd made that promise while she took her last breath. He'd kept it too in his own way. Children were untouchable in his organization. Human trafficking was a line he'd never cross. Anyone who harmed innocents in his territory answered to him personally, and the answers he extracted were written in shallow graves outside the city. Time to remind Kozlov why those rules existed. Volkov gently moved Sophia aside, her fevered protests dying as she saw something shift in his expression, and knelt down to Sandra's level. His expensive suit touched the dusty ground. He took her small hand in his scarred one, feeling how badly she was trembling. "Show me who's been following you, Malishka," he said, his voice low and careful. Sandra pointed across the street without looking directly at the van. "The man there. He knows my name, but I never told him. He's always watching." Volkov's jaw tightened. Professional surveillance. Measuring vulnerability. Calculating when to strike. He stood slowly, still holding Sandra's hand, and turned to his security team. "We're walking her to school. Full detail. I want eyes on every vehicle within 3 blocks. Document everything, plates, faces, positions. And someone get me a direct line to Captain Morrison." His driver Marco's eyes widened. "Sir, this is a child in my territory asking for protection." Volkov's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "That's all that matters." As they began walking, Sandra's small fingers squeezed his hand tighter. Behind them, the estate staff watched in stunned silence. Across the street, the Predator's engine started, but didn't pull away immediately. Making a point. Letting Volkov know this wasn't over. Good. Volkov had been looking for an excuse to dismantle Kozlov's network for months. Now he had one worth dying for. The neighborhood began to wake as they moved down the sidewalk, a Mafia boss in a $3,000 suit holding hands with an 8-year-old girl in a worn school uniform, flanked by armed men who looked like they were escorting visiting royalty instead of a cleaner's daughter. Windows opened. Curtains parted. Mrs. Chen paused in her bakery doorway. Flour-dusted hands frozen. Mr. Rodriguez stepped out of his corner store. Coffee forgotten. Because what they were witnessing defied every law of their world. Dmitry Volkov didn't walk children to school. But today he did. And everyone watching knew that meant something had just fundamentally changed. The morning shift at Chen's bakery always started at 5. Mrs. Chen had seen everything this neighborhood had to offer over 23 years. Drug deals, shootings, police raids that left more questions than answers. She'd learned the same lesson everyone else had. See nothing, say nothing, survive. But when Dmitry Volkov walked past her storefront holding an 8-year-old's hand like she was made of glass, flour spilled from her forgotten measuring cup. Mr. Rodriguez abandoned his morning coffee delivery, stepping onto the sidewalk to watch the impossible parade. Windows scraped open along the 2nd and 3rd floors, the apartments above the laundromat, the insurance office, the check-cashing place where everyone knew not to ask questions. Faces appeared. Neighbors who'd perfected the art of minding their own business suddenly couldn't look away. Because Dmitry Volkov didn't do this. Men in his position didn't walk children to school. They didn't hold small hands with the kind of careful gentleness that suggested something breakable and precious. They certainly didn't protect the daughter of their cleaning staff while security teams flanked them like she was visiting royalty. He's always there in the morning, Sandra said, her voice barely above a whisper as they walked. She pointed ahead without looking directly at the van that had started following them at a careful distance. By the blue mailbox first. Then he moves closer to the school gates. Sometimes he pretends to talk on his phone, but he never stops watching. Volkov's jaw tightened. The predator was maintaining professional surveillance distance. Close enough to intimidate. Far enough to claim innocence if confronted. How long has this been happening? 3 weeks. Sandra's fingers squeezed his hand tighter. Mama went to the police 5 times. They said she was imagining things because we're. Because your complaints don't carry the same weight as others, Volkov finished quietly. The ugly truth laid bare between them. He pulled out his phone, never breaking stride. Marco. Boss. His lieutenant's voice came through immediately. I need background checks on every adult male who's been seen near Lincoln Elementary in the past month. Prioritize anyone asking questions about children's schedules, anyone watching the gates, anyone driving vehicles suitable for transport. I want names, addresses, known associates, and criminal histories on my desk within 2 hours. Understood. Anything else? Contact Petrov at the estate. Sophia Reyes's accommodations are being upgraded immediately. Staff housing, renovated wing. Full health coverage, dental, the complete package. Make it happen before she finishes her shift today. He ended that call and dialed another. Captain Morrison. A pause, then a careful voice. Mr. Volkov. What can I do for you? There's a credible threat against children in the 7th District. I'm texting you a description and license plate right now. I suggest you investigate properly this time instead of dismissing concerned mothers because of their tax brackets. Now wait a minute, I don't. I have recordings of Officer Martinez's 5 conversations with Miss Reyes. Would you like me to forward them to the mayor's office? Or perhaps Channel 7 News? I'm sure they'd love a story about how your department handles child safety reports from working-class families. Silence. Then, we'll look into it immediately. Volkov pocketed his phone. They were 4 blocks from school now. Sandra hadn't let go of his hand. Mr. Volkov. Her voice was small, confused. Why are you helping me? Mama says important people don't help people like us. She says we're lucky if they just don't notice us. Volkov stopped walking. He knelt again, right there on the sidewalk, ignoring the cameras he knew were recording this moment, ignoring the witnesses gathering, ignoring everything except the little girl who'd been brave enough to ask a monster for protection. Your mama is wrong about something, Malishka, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Power that doesn't protect the innocent is just cruelty with better clothes. I have power. Real power. And if I don't use it to keep children like you safe, then what's the point? I'm just another predator in an expensive suit. Sandra's eyes went wide. Then, impossibly, she smiled. You talk like my mama when she thinks I'm asleep. She says you're scary but not mean. Your mama is very wise. Around them, the neighborhood watched. And in that moment something shifted. Mrs. Chen straightened her shoulders. Mr. Rodriguez pulled out his phone, documenting the van that had been circling back. Parents began emerging from buildings, walking their own children to school earlier than usual. If the most powerful man in the city thought their children were worth protecting, maybe, just maybe, they were worth protecting too. By evening, photographs of this moment would circulate through every criminal network in the city. And Viktor Kozlov would see them and make a choice that would ignite the war both men knew was coming. But right now, Sandra Reyes walked to school holding the hand of a killer who decided, 32 years too late, to keep the promise he'd made to his dying mother. By 6 o'clock that evening, photographs of Dmitry Volkov walking hand in hand with a small girl had circulated through every criminal network in the city. Digital copies, printed copies, copies analyzed and discussed in backrooms and warehouses and offices where legitimate business ended and darker enterprises began. Viktor Kozlov spread 3 of the clearest images across his desk like tarot cards predicting someone's future. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, a smile playing at his lips that would have made Sandra's instincts scream. Volkov's going soft, he said to the 4 men gathered in his warehouse office. 30 years of being untouchable, and now he's playing bodyguard to the help's kid. Alexei Petrov, Kozlov's lieutenant, picked up one photo. Volkov kneeling on the sidewalk, looking at Sandra with something almost like tenderness. It's worse than soft. He's emotionally invested. That makes him predictable. Vulnerable. Exactly. Kozlov tapped the image. For 8 months he's been blocking our expansion into his territory. Refusing partnerships. Turning down profitable deals because of his so-called principles about innocence and children. He spat the words like curses. But now we know his weakness. He cares. And men who care can be manipulated. Dmitry Costa, the youngest in the room, shifted uncomfortably. Boss, this is Volkov we're talking about. He's killed men for less than what you're suggesting. He's killed men who threatened his business, Kozlov corrected. But this isn't business. This is personal. That's the point. We grab the girl tomorrow morning. Quick, clean, before he can react. Send him a message. Prove that sentiment is a liability he can't afford. And then what? Alexei asked. Then we negotiate. He backs off our operations, gives us 3 territories, and maybe, we give him back the girl unharmed. We prove that his protection means nothing when we decide to act. The men around the table nodded, convinced this was the play. This was how you toppled a king. Find what he cares about, threaten to destroy it. What none of them knew was that their entire conversation was being recorded. 3 blocks away, in an apartment Volkov had purchased under a shell company 8 months ago, Marco sat with headphones on, listening to every word. The listening device had been planted during a routine inspection of Kozlov's warehouse, a fire marshal's visit that Volkov had arranged, complete with legitimate credentials and a very cooperative inspector who understood the value of looking the other way. Marco's phone was dialing before Kozlov finished outlining his plan. Boss, they're moving tomorrow morning. 8:15, between the estate and the school. Alexei and 2 others. They're planning to grab Sandra. Use her as leverage. There was a pause on the other end. When Volkov spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. Let them try. Sir. You heard me, Marco. Let them come. But I want every available man in position by 7 a.m. undercover. Neighbors, shopkeepers, utility workers. I want that 6-block radius saturated with our people pretending to be civilians. When they make their move, I want witnesses everywhere. Good witnesses. The kind that make police investigations very straightforward. Understood. What about Sandra? Triple her protection, but make it invisible. I don't want Kozlov spooked. Let him think he has the advantage right up until the moment he realizes he's walked into a trap. Marco allowed himself a grim smile. This is going to start a war, boss. The war started the moment one of his hunters stood outside my estate, stalking a child under my protection. Volkov's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Tomorrow we just make it official. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this story, I need your help. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the year ends, and I'm not going to lie, every single subscription matters to me right now. It's not just a number. It's proof that what I'm creating is actually reaching people. So if this content is adding value to your day, please take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. It would genuinely mean the world to me. Alright, let's get back to it. But after he ended the call, Volkov stood at his office window looking out over the city lights and allowed himself a moment of brutal honesty. Kozlov would fail tomorrow. The kidnapping attempt would be thwarted. But men like Kozlov didn't accept failure quietly. They escalated. They retaliated. They made examples. And there were dozens of children in the city without a mafia boss protecting them. The war was just beginning. Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through windows that shouldn't exist in her cramped quarters. She blinked, disoriented, still fever-foggy, and realized she wasn't in her small room anymore. The space was 3 times larger. Clean walls painted warm cream. New furniture, a real bed with a proper headboard, a small living area with a couch, a kitchenette with modern appliances. Medical supplies sat on the counter. Fever reducers, cough medicine, antibiotics, even a thermometer still in its package. A handwritten note rested on the nightstand in precise, masculine script. Your daughter's courage inspired this. You both deserve better. D.V. Sophia's hands trembled as she held the note. She'd worked for 3 years in those quarters, never complaining, never asking for anything beyond her wages. And in one morning, because Sandra had been brave enough to ask for help, everything had changed. She found Sandra already dressed for school, backpack ready, standing by the window watching the street below. Mama, there are a lot of people outside today. That morning, when Volkov's black Mercedes pulled up to the estate gates, he wasn't alone. 8 of his men flanked him, visible and armed. But something else had happened overnight. Something that made even Marco raise his eyebrows in surprise. The neighborhood had woken up. Mrs. Chen stood outside her bakery with a tray of fresh pastries and a determined expression. Mr. Rodriguez positioned himself on the corner, arms crossed, watching. Parents walked their children to school earlier than usual, forming small clusters along the route to Lincoln Elementary. The usual morning emptiness had been replaced by presence. Deliberate, purposeful presence. Word had spread, not through official channels, but through the whisper network that connected every working family in the neighborhood. Dmitry Volkov was protecting one of their own. And if the most powerful man in the city thought their children were worth defending, maybe they should act like it too. At 8:15 exactly, Alexei Petrov and 2 men emerged from a parked van 3 blocks from the school. Their plan was simple. Grab Sandra during the narrow window between estate and school, throw her in the van, disappear into traffic before anyone could react. But when they moved toward Sandra, walking hand in hand with Volkov, something impossible happened. Mrs. Chen stepped directly into their path, holding her pastry tray like a shield. Excuse me, gentlemen. Can I offer you something? You look like you're in the wrong neighborhood. Mr. Rodriguez appeared at Alexei's left shoulder. Yes, definitely lost. School's that way. Are you fathers? I don't recognize you from the PDA meetings. More neighbors materialized. Not threatening, not armed, just present. Creating a human wall between the predators and their prey with nothing but their bodies and their willingness to be seen. 20 people. 30. Parents with children, shopkeepers, office workers heading to morning shifts. All stopping. All watching. All positioned between Alexei and his target. Alexei's hand moved toward his waistband but froze when he realized what he was seeing. This is our neighborhood, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Her accent thick but her words crystal clear. These are our children. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air. 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. Officers emerged with hands on their weapons. Captain Morrison himself stepped forward. Alexei Petrov, we need you to come with us. We have some questions about your activities in this area. As Alexei was led away in handcuffs, his two associates following, Volkov turned to address the crowd that had gathered. His voice carried across the street, and for once the fear people usually felt when he spoke was absent, replaced by something else. Something like respect. "This," he said simply, gesturing to the neighbors who'd stood their ground, "is what happens when a community decides to protect its own. Thank you." The courier arrived at 2:47 p.m., professional, anonymous in a nondescript uniform, delivering a manila envelope with no return address. Marco signed for it, his instincts already screaming wrong before he'd even opened the seal. Inside were 4 school photographs. Standard 8x10s, the kind parents bought every year and displayed on mantels and refrigerators. Except these had been marked with red X's. Violent slashes across smiling children's faces. 7-year-old Miguel Santos from St. Augustine Elementary. Taken from the playground at 1:15 p.m. 9-year-old Lily Chen from Riverside Academy. Vanished during dismissal at 2 p.m. 6-year-old Isabella Torres from Holy Trinity School. Last seen in the parking lot at 2:20 p.m. 10-year-old Marcus Williams from Northside Elementary. Disappeared walking home at 2:35 p.m. 4 children. 4 different schools. 4 neighborhoods where Dmitry Volkov had no presence, no influence, no ability to intervene. All taken within 90 minutes of Alexei Petrov's arrest. The message scrawled on the back of each photo was identical, written in elegant script that spoke of education and calculation. "You saved 1. We took 4. You can't protect them all, Volkov." But it was the 5th photograph that made Marco's blood turn to ice. Sandra Reyes, smiling in her school picture from last year. Curly hair neat, eyes bright. Someone had drawn crosshairs over her face in red ink. The message on this one was different. "Tomorrow, the cleaner's daughter pays for your arrogance." Marco was already moving toward Volkov's office when Sophia's scream echoed through the estate. She'd been bringing afternoon tea service when she'd seen the photos spread across Marco's desk. The tray crashed to the marble floor, porcelain shattering as her knees gave out. "Oh God! Oh God, no!" Her voice broke. "This is my fault. I should never have let her ask you for help. Those children, those poor children, because of us. Because of Sandra. Mama." Sandra ran from the staff quarters, drawn by her mother's anguish. She saw the photos, saw the red X's, and her young face went pale. But she didn't cry. Instead, she knelt beside her mother with a composure that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old. "No, Mama. This isn't your fault." Her voice was steady, certain. "It's his fault. The bad man who takes children. Not you. Not me. Not Mr. Volkov." Volkov had arrived by then, his face a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene. 4 missing children. 4 families destroyed. All because he dared to protect one little girl who'd asked him for help. Sandra looked up at him, her hand still holding her mother's. And in her eyes was something that nearly broke him. Absolute, unwavering trust. "You're going to stop him, right, Mr. Volkov?" Her voice didn't waver. "You're going to find those kids and bring them home." The weight of that trust was heavier than any debt he'd ever carried. More binding than any oath he'd ever sworn. For children he'd never met. Taken because he'd made Kozlov look weak. For families who'd done nothing except live in neighborhoods where the wrong predator operated. This was the price of protection. This was what happened when you drew a line in the sand against men who saw human beings as commodities. They didn't retreat. They escalated. They made you choose between the one you'd promised to protect and the many you hadn't. Except Dmitry Volkov had never been good at accepting impossible choices. He knelt beside Sandra, meeting her eyes with the same honesty he'd shown that first morning. "Yes, Malishka. I'm going to find them. All of them. And I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Promise." He thought of his mother's last words. Of the promise he'd made 32 years ago. Of the little girl in front of him who'd been brave enough to ask a monster for help, and kind enough to believe he could be more than what he was. "I promise." Marco laid out the brutal mathematics of impossible choices on Volkov's desk like a coroner performing an autopsy. Maps marked with red circles. Resource allocations. Personnel deployments. Numbers that didn't lie. We can't do both, boss. His voice was steady, professional. The voice of a man who'd made hard decisions before. We don't have the manpower to fortify the estate and conduct a citywide search for 4 missing children. Kozlov knows this. That's why he did it. Force us to choose. He gestured to the photographs. The smart play is fortress protection around Sandra and Sophia. Lock down the estate. Let the police handle the kidnappings. We keep our promise to the one we can actually protect. Volkov stared at the photographs. Miguel Santos, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile in his school picture. Lily Chen, 9, wearing glasses too big for her small face. Isabella Torres, 6, with ribbons in her dark hair. Marcus Williams, 10, serious expression like he was already carrying the weight of his neighborhood's expectations. For children he'd never met. For families who'd never asked him for anything. For lives hanging in the balance because he dared to walk one little girl to school. Through his office window, he could see Sandra helping her mother to the couch in their new quarters, bringing water, speaking in that calm voice that shouldn't belong to a child who'd just learned she had a target on her back. Marco followed his gaze. She's safe here, boss. We can keep her safe. But those other kids, they're in 4 different locations by now, maybe already out of the city. This is a losing battle. Don't throw away what you can protect trying to save what you can't. It was the smart play. The logical play. The play that every rule of organized crime said he should make. Protect your own. Cut your losses. Don't let emotion override strategy. Volkov thought of his mother. Yellow dress soaking red. Whispering her last words with blood on her lips. Protect the innocent, Dmitri. Promise me. He'd been 9 years old. One child. The only child she could save. But he wasn't 9 anymore. He wasn't powerless. He was Dmitri Volkov, and he controlled half the city's infrastructure, a quarter of its political apparatus, and enough resources to wage a war that would reshape the entire criminal landscape. Then we make the resources, he said quietly. Marco blinked. Sir. Quadruple security around Sandra and Sophia. I want this estate locked down like a military installation. But also mobilize everyone, and I mean everyone. Every associate, every contact, every debt we're owed, every favor outstanding. Pull people from the docks, the construction sites, the gambling operations. I don't care if business stops for a week. We're finding those children. Boss, this goes against every rule. Yes. I know. Volkov stood, his decision crystallizing into certainty. Get me addresses for the families. All 4. An hour later, Dmitri Volkov walked into Miguel Santos's small apartment in the barrio, where the boy's mother sat surrounded by useless police officers and helpless neighbors. He came alone. No guards, no weapons, no displays of power. Just a man in an expensive suit with scars on his knuckles and guilt in his eyes. Mrs. Santos, my name is Dmitri Volkov. I'm here to help find your son. She looked up through swollen eyes. Help? You're the reason he's gone. Everyone knows Kozlov took those children because of you. The accusation landed like a blade between his ribs. Because it was true. You're right, he said simply. This is my fault. Which is why I will bring Miguel home. No payment. No debt. This is my responsibility. He knelt before her, this grieving mother in her tiny apartment, and made the same promise he'd made to Sandra. Then he visited Lily Chen's family. Isabella Torres's family. Marcus Williams's family. Each time he knelt. Each time he promised. And each time, he carried the weight of what his protection had cost them. That evening, in a neighborhood square crowded with frightened parents and curious onlookers, Dmitri Volkov made a public declaration that shattered every tradition of organized crime. Any child in this territory is now under my protection. He held up cards with contact information. If you see something suspicious, call these numbers. No retaliation. No cost. No conditions. Your children's safety is not negotiable. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Why should we trust you?" You're the reason those kids were taken in the first place." The accusation hung in the air. Volkov could have deflected it, could have reminded them of his power, could have made it about fear instead of trust. Instead, he met the speaker's eyes directly. "Because a brave little girl trusted me first," he said quietly. "And I refused to prove her wrong." The first tip came at 11:47 p.m. from a janitor who'd seen suspicious activity at an abandoned textile factory on the east side. He'd never reported anything to police before. People in his position learned early that getting involved meant risking everything. But he'd heard Volkov's promise in the square. He'd seen the photos of the missing children. And he decided that some things mattered more than staying invisible. The second tip came 20 minutes later from a night nurse who'd noticed a man buying unusual quantities of children's medication at an all-night pharmacy. Cough syrup, pain relievers, the kind of supplies you'd need if you were keeping kids quiet and compliant in a place where they couldn't access proper care. The third tip came at 12:20 a.m. from a delivery driver who'd seen a gray van with tinted windows, the same van from the surveillance photos, parked behind a warehouse in Sector 9. Suddenly, people were talking. The same community that had learned to see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing was finding its voice. Because one little girl had found hers first. By 3 a.m., Marco had triangulated the location. Warehouse complex on the industrial waterfront. Technically outside our territory, but close enough. Thermal imaging shows 4 heat signatures. Small bodies. Not moving much. How long to assemble a team? 20 minutes. But boss, Marco hesitated. If we go in alone and something goes wrong, those kids become leverage or worse. We need backup we can actually trust. Volkov pulled out his phone and made a call he never thought he'd make. "Captain Morrison. I know where the children are. The raid happened at dawn." A complicated alliance between Volkov's organization and Morrison's tactical unit. The kind of cooperation that would never appear in any official report but got results when the system's usual channels moved too slowly. Volkov's men provided the intelligence, the surveillance, the entry points. Morrison's team provided the legal authority, the tactical expertise, the legitimacy that would make everything stick in court. They moved through the pre-dawn darkness like shadows with purpose. 2 teams. 1 objective. 4 signatures confirmed. Marco whispered through the calm northwest corner. "Second floor. 2 guards posted outside the door. Can you get a visual?" Morrison's voice was tense. "Working on it." "Got it. Boss, they're alive. All 4. Scared but breathing." Volkov felt something loosen in his chest. "Then let's bring them home." The warehouse doors breached at exactly 5:33 a.m. Tactical teams swarmed through corridors that smelled of rust and fear and human desperation. Volkov's men moved with lethal precision, neutralizing guards before they could react. Morrison's officers secured evidence, documented everything, made sure this would hold up in court. The door to the holding room came down with a single kick. And inside, huddled together in the corner, were 4 children who'd been missing for 14 hours but felt like 14 years to their families. Miguel Santos emerged first, scared but unharmed, running past the tactical officers and straight into his mother's arms. She collapsed to her knees on the warehouse floor, clutching him like she'd never let go. Then Lily Chen, blinking against the dawn light, searching frantically until she saw her parents and started crying. Isabella Torres, so small she had to be carried by one of Morrison's officers. Marcus Williams, walking out on his own but trembling, trying to be brave. 4 children. 14 hours missing. All safe. Viktor Kozlov was arrested trying to flee through the back exit. His network built on fear and secrecy crumbling the moment people stopped being afraid to speak. Alexei Petrov, already in custody, turned evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. Names, locations, bank accounts, everything needed to dismantle an operation that had been operating in the shadows for 5 years. 3 days later, at a community meeting in the same square where Volkov had made his promise, Sofia Reyes did something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. She stood up. "My name is Sofia Reyes," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I'm a cleaner. I work at Mr. Volkov's estate. Nobody listens to cleaners. We're supposed to be invisible, grateful, quiet. She looked around at the faces watching her. Faces like hers. Working people. Invisible people. But my daughter was braver than me. When she was scared, she asked for help. When I was scared, I stayed silent. Her voice grew stronger. If an 8-year-old girl can find the courage to speak up, what's our excuse? If she can do that, we all can. The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. That same week, Volkov established the Volkov Foundation for Child Safety. Funded by his legitimate construction and shipping businesses, staffed by former social workers and retired police officers who actually cared. A phone line answered 24/7. Resources for families. Pressure on authorities to take reports seriously regardless of who filed them. 2 weeks after that first morning, Volkov walked Sandra to school again. But this time they weren't alone. Dozens of children walked with him. Miguel Santos holding his mother's hand. Lily Chen chattering with her friends. Isabella Torres skipping ahead with new ribbons in her hair. Marcus Williams walking tall, knowing he was safe. Sophia walked too, head high, no longer invisible but seen. Really seen. At the school gates, Sandra looked up at Volkov with those serious eyes that had started everything. Mr. Volkov, are the bad men all gone now? The ones who take children. He knelt one more time, this ritual that had become theirs. There will always be more bad men, Malishka. That's why we have to stay watchful. That's why your community has to stay awake. And you'll help us. Always. Sandra smiled, that fearless smile that had changed everything, and hugged him before running to join her friends. Volkov stood, watching the children disappear into the school, and realized that the little girl who'd been too scared to walk 6 blocks alone had awakened something in him that decades of violence had buried. The ability to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than tear down, to be the guardian his mother had died hoping he'd become. One act of courage. One simple request. One child brave enough to ask a monster for help. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage exists in the smallest voices and redemption is possible in the darkest hearts, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that standing up matters, that asking for help is strength, not weakness. Because stories like Sandra's aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that every single one of us has the power to be someone's protector. The war for every child's safety has just begun. And heroes aren't always who you expect them to be.